Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some really critical recent sources, stuff that reveals the immediate pressure points shaping the economy, both internationally and right here at home. So if you're looking for a shortcut to understanding the complex forces pushing and pulling policy decisions this quarter, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Absolutely. We've synthesized reports across three areas that are fundamentally linked. First, the high-stakes game of global trade negotiations. Second, this really fascinating industrial transformation happening over in China. And third, a pretty severe domestic financial squeeze. It's impacting everyday consumers and driving some radical tax reform proposals. Yeah, these aren't just isolated incidents. They really represent a high-stakes moment for policymakers.
Right. And our mission is to connect those dots for you. We'll start with those external pressures, the U.S.-Korea trade dynamics, President Trump's, let's say, high-volume rhetoric. Then we'll shift to China, look at that seismic shift in their industrial identity. And finally, bring it home to the domestic credit cliff that's hitting home buyers and the government's, frankly, bold new vision for property tax.
Okay, the sources really paint a picture of intense negotiation and reaction. Let's unpack this, starting where the global capital demands seem loudest, trade.
Absolutely. So we have this recent diplomatic readout from Presidential Policy Chief Kim Young-boom after his trip to Washington, D.C. And his report sounded, well, decidedly upbeat. He said the talks were serious and constructive, significant progress made, even suggested a trade deal might get done around the APEC summit. Sounds like a win, right?
It does on the surface. But here's where the high-stakes drama really kicks in. You cannot just read Kim's measured optimism in isolation, because almost simultaneously, U.S. President Trump gave remarks that set an extraordinarily high public bar for what he considers fair trade.
He used numbers that were, honestly staggering. Trump argued that for trade to be truly fair, hundreds of billions of dollars, even trillions of dollars, needed to flow into the U.S. from partners like Korea, Japan, the EU. He basically called decades of trade one-way traffic.
And that's the critical takeaway here, isn't it? The cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
That huge gap between these two statements. On one side, you have the presidential office suggesting, the technical points are nearly ironed out. But on the other side, the ultimate decision maker, Trump, is publicly demanding a flow reversal measured in the trillions.
Well,
it's stark.
But hold on. Is that figure, the trillions, is that a genuine financial target? Or is it more like strategic leverage? I mean, if the U.S. really expects trillions back just through trade adjustments, that sounds almost impossible economically. How do we square that with talks being constructive?
That's a really important question. And it gets to the nature of modern trade talks. The sources suggest this trillion-dollar talk might be less about specific tariffs and more about demanding immediate, massive corporate investment commitments. They're essentially putting a public price tag on resolving these trade disputes.
And we saw evidence supporting that idea, didn't we? Specifically that Gulf meeting. Trump met with the heads of major Korean companies, Samsung's Lee Jae-yong, SK's Jae Tae-won, Hyundai's Chung Wei-sun, LG's Koo Kwang-mo, Hanwha's Kim Dong-kwon.
Exactly. That meeting probably wasn't about negotiating tiny details on tariff schedules. It's highly likely it was a direct pitch, maybe even a demand for those companies to announce huge investments in U.S. manufacturing, in tech sectors. Basically, address that need for trillions through corporate capital flows, not just export taxes. So it connects the dots. High-level trade rhetoric linked directly to pressure for corporate capital commitments. It's multifaceted pressure.
Okay, so that high external demand for capital flow, it brings us nicely to our second global shift, equally significant for long-term strategy, China's rapid industrial transformation. The annual Canton Fair is huge, we know that, 32,000 companies, 240,000 buyers. But the scale itself isn't really the main story anymore.
No, what's fascinating now is the fundamental shift in what's being shown. For decades, made in China meant reliable, low-cost manufacturing, often making things designed elsewhere. That perception, it's collapsing.
Yeah.
The fair's focus has moved decisively into advanced areas, AI, specialized robotics, complex service systems.
And the sources really emphasize this isn't just about adopting tech, it's about design leadership now. Domestic design experts observe that it's the blend of advanced tech with high-level design sophistication that's driving the change.
And that's the core insight, really. China is intentionally shifting from made in China to what experts are calling created in China. They're not just building things anymore. They're generating original designs, setting global trends in major industries. For countries competing in high-value manufacturing, the U.S., Korea, Japan included, This is huge. China's becoming a direct competitor not just on price, but on innovation, on industrial artistry. It completely changes the calculation for global supply chains.
So we've got these escalating external demands for capital from the US and a rising global high-tech competitor in China. Let's pivot back home now. Where do these global pressures meet internal domestic policy? Specifically, this serious squeeze on credit and the housing market.
Yeah, the sources confirm it. The domestic credit cliff isn't a forecast anymore. It's happening now. It's measurable. Banks are hitting the brakes hard on lending because they've hit their annual household loan caps. These are caps set by regulators.
And there's specific evidence of just how severe this is getting. Hana Bank, for instance, blew past its annual cap about 910 billion won, which is close to 680 million US dollars by several hundred billion, won just mid-month. And Shinhan, NH Nanghai, they already hit their caps last month. KB Cookman is expected to hit its limit like any day now.
Right. And the immediate consequence for you if you're trying to buy a home is a sudden, dramatic drying up of available loans. Liquidity just vanishes. Look at Woori Bank. They restricted mortgages and Jianzi loans, that unique Korean housing deposit loan, to only 1 billion won per branch for November and December. That's a hard stop designed purely to stay under the regulatory ceiling.
Let's pause just for a second on that term, John-se. Can you quickly explain how it differs from a mortgage and why restricting those loans is so disruptive?
Sure, a Jean's loan isn't for buying the property itself. It's for the massive lump sum deposit the tenant gives the landlord the key money. Instead of monthly rent, the tenant borrows this huge sum, the landlord holds it, often using it like interest-free capital. So when banks restrict Jean's loans, it really paralyzes renters trying to move, and they're a crucial part of the whole housing market chain.
Okay, got it. And who's getting hit hardest by this overall lending drought? The reports mention EDECO, or real buyers. Who are they and why is policy failing them?
EDEC basically means genuine end users. Think first-time home buyers, families needing a bigger place because their life situation changed, people buying a home to actually live in it. The policy paradox here is that the rules meant to curb speculation, like the 10.15 measure limiting high-value loans, are now hitting these genuine buyers just as hard.
That seems to be the critical point, right? The policy aims to cool the market, fine, but the cooling effect is disproportionately freezing out the end users who actually need bank financing. Meanwhile, speculators, or maybe ultra-rich people paying cash, they're largely unaffected.
Exactly. And then you have the policy loans, the ones designed to help first-time buyers. They're running into a statistical trap. The government's main policy loans, like the BBM Jari loan, they're capped. Restricted to homes valued under 600 million won, roughly $450,000 USD.
600 million won. If you look at housing prices in major cities like Seoul, that limit feels completely out of date.
It is, which makes the policy pretty ineffective where it's arguably needed most.
Yeah.
The sources confirm it. In Seoul, only about 15% of homes are even priced under that 600 million won threshold anymore. Think about popular areas, Mapo, Seongdong. Average apartment prices there are already around 1.5 billion won. So these policy loans, totally inaccessible for genuine buyers in those areas. The market just freezes up and only cash buyers can really move.
Yeah, that sounds like a direct policy failure highlighted in the report, this inability to distinguish between speculators and, say, an average family trying to buy a home.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this market rigidity, this freeze caused by the credit squeeze, brings us to the government's next big and pretty radical proposed solution: a major property tax overhaul. The goal seems to be fundamentally changing how people view real estate as an investment vehicle.
Right. Vice Prime Minister Koo Yoon-keol mentioned this while he was in Washington, D.C., a pretty significant shift, implementing a 1% property tax rate. Similar, he said, to what's seen in parts of the U.S.
This would be a huge change, a paradigm shift, really. Let's make the numbers concrete for a second. If you own a home valued at, say, 5 billion won, that's about $3.7 million USD, a 1% annual tax rate means a 50 million won tax bill every single year. That's a recurring substantial cost. It's designed to make holding very high-value property, especially if it's just sitting there non-productively, prohibitively expensive.
And the specific motivation for this kind of rate increase, what's the goal beyond just raising revenue?
The main goal seems to be about equity and changing behavior, specifically targeting this phenomenon known as oyugo. That phrase, it translates roughly to one smart home. It describes the strategy where people sell off several cheaper properties to consolidate all their wealth into one single, extremely expensive property, which, under older tax rules, often ended up having a lower overall tax burden than owning the multiple cheaper ones.
So owning 500 million one homes could mean paying more total tax than owning 5 billion one place.
Historically, yeah, due to how progressive tax rates worked, various deductions, loopholes, it could happen. This 1% proposal aims right at that perceived unfairness. It hits those high-value assets with a flat, significant annual tax, making that one smart home strategy much less attractive financially.
Wow, okay. That is a major structural change. It suggests the government is really serious about trying to shift capital away from just sitting in passive real estate. What's the timeline look like?
They're not rushing it, which probably reflects how politically sensitive this is. The plan is to conduct thorough research over the next year, and then include these specific tax measures in the tax law revision scheduled for next August. So it signals a commitment, but a longer-term one, focused on discouraging real estate as the default primary investment.
Okay, we've covered a remarkable range of economic forces today. You've got the external pressure for trillions in capital driven by the U.S. trade stance, then the need to compete with China's new high-design, high-tech industrial strength. And internally, this policy push to drastically reshape the domestic financial landscape, using both a severe credit squeeze and these radical tax proposals.
The whole system is definitely feeling the pressure. It seems policymakers are trying hard to force capital into more productive parts of the economy. Areas like the high-tech, design-focused sectors that China is now prioritizing so heavily.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Right. If the big picture goal is shifting capital away from real estate speculation and towards productive economic growth, how effective can that policy really be if, at the same time, this credit cliff is freezing the ability of genuine end users, real buyers, to even access capital? When you restrict the ability of normal people to buy and sell homes, doesn't that risk seizing up the very housing market mechanism that's supposed to free up capital for other investments? What does this kind of double pressure strategy really mean for overall economic fluidity? For competitiveness, especially when facing these major global challenges? It's a tough balance policymakers urgently need to figure out.
Definitely something to keep in mind as those tax reforms develop. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into these critical economic shifts.
Thank you. We look forward to sharing more insights synthesized from the sources you need to know next time.